All right, guys, this lecture is going to be on organizational structure and how they work, at least the last end of this part of the chapter. So when we get to delegation, what's really happening is that, for example, at Blinn College, the chancellor of the university or the college says, hey, my job, the board of directors has given her the job of providing an education to all these students. And she says, well, I can't, certainly I as one person can't do financial aid and enrollment and admissions and teach classes and run student programs, etc. Okay, and so then she delegates those portions of her job. She says, okay, you're going to do the enrollment part. And so she hires someone to do that and delegates that task to them. And you're going to do the admissions. And she hires someone and delegates that part of her job to them. And so that's really what's happening when you delegate, is you're delegating a portion of your job because it's too big for you to do it all. And you keep passing down parts of your job to do to lower and lower levels of the organization. Okay, so that's what delegation is: assigning a part of my job to workers below me. Okay, so steps in delegation process is one. I have to give you the responsibility. I have to say it's now your job to perform the task. You now have the duty to do that. I have to also grant you authority, meaning that I can't tell you to go order supplies for me, but also not give you the password to get into the system or the authority to spend the money, right? So I have to give you the money and the password to the account to be able to actually do that task. So I have to grant you authority. And the other one is I have to create accountability. I have to hold you accountable for actually getting that job done. And this is a big one because ultimately what happens is you can create accountability, but you can't actually delegate accountability. So I can't pass it down to you and say, okay, it's now your job. If you don't get it done, you're in trouble, and expect that I not get in trouble, because originally it was part of my job, right? And so my boss is going to say, why didn't you get this job done? And I don't get to just be like, well, because I gave it to them to do and they didn't get it done. So, and that's actually one of the barriers to to delegation, is that you don't trust them to get the task done, and therefore you don't trust that you won't get in trouble for not getting the task done. Sometimes managers fear that they'll do it too well, and so they don't want to get outshined by one of their subordinates. And then the other one is that you may just be disorganized. All right, so that kind of brings us to decentralization and centralization, okay? So in a decentralized organization, we're going to allow lower levels of the organization to make decisions on their own, all right? We're going to give them authority to do things on their own, and in centralized organizations, we're going to hold that power, we're going to concentrate it to the upper levels. Okay, so we're going to have managers holding the power and not allowing lower level managers or employees make those decisions. So some factors that influence the extent of decentralization. So things that'll make it so that you will may be more likely to decentralize is an external environment that's more complex and unpredictable. Okay, so things are constantly changing, and you let the employees react to those changes, because if you stop to try to make decisions, by the time you try to make a decision, the environment's changed again. Okay, so they have to make decisions with the environment that's in front of them right then. The nature of the decision itself. If it's a riskier decision, it has a bigger impact on the business, it's less likely to be decentralized. Okay, so if it's going to cost us a bunch of money or have a high impact on our business, we want more eyes to look at it. We don't want the lower levels. The ability of our lower level managers definitely plays a factor. If we have a good manager that we trust, we'll give them more authority. And the same is true if we have one that we don't trust as much, we won't give them as much authority. And then just kind of what we've traditionally always done. So the way our company has been set up from the beginning will impact whether we tend to centralize or decentralize. All right. So whether we centralize or decentralize will impact our span of management or span of control. If we decentralize, we tend to have wider spans of management, which means that we have more subordinates, more people that we oversee. Okay, so here at Blinn College, I oversee a faculty. I oversee 45 faculty members. All right, so I have a very wide span of management. In some businesses, you might have very narrow spans, so you don't let them have as much authority and control, and so that you can directly oversee them. You're centralized, and you're going to directly oversee the employees below you, so you only have maybe 2 to 4 employees underneath you. That way you can have more hands-on approach. Okay, so that would be a narrow span of management. All right, so if we have wide spans of management, what we end up seeing is we end up with what are called flat organizations. Okay, so when we look at the organizational structure, it'll be more really flattened and wide. And tall organizations have narrow spans of management. So basically, think of it as a piece of paper, and a flat organization would be landscape mode, and a tall organization would be portrait mode. Okay. Is kind of what you're looking at. All right. Wide spans of management. Your manager tends to spend a lot more time doing administrative tasks and overseeing employees, because it takes them a lot longer to go from employee to employee to make sure that everybody's taken care of. And then on the tall organization, you end up with a lot more middle management, and tends to make it more expensive because managers cost more than employees. And then the other thing is these guys actually might spend time with 2 employees, so that it doesn't take as long, and they're available to them. But that also allows them to help in whatever specialty they have. So if this is human resources, they help the human resource people below them, but they actually have time to do human resource related work. Whereas over here, if this is human resources, by the time I get done helping all these employees with their HR related work, I don't have as much time to do HR related work myself. Okay, so they spend more time in their functional area over here in the narrow span than they do in the wide span. So organizational height is the number of layers that you have. So tall organizations are going to have more layers, and flat organizations are going to have less layers than in their organization. All right. And so that brings us to some of the structures that you might see, the common ones that we're going to talk about. So line structure is a structure where, right here, this is a line structure, okay? So take out these 2 staff positions, and that's a line structure. The line structure just is a drawing like this one here. This is a line structure, okay? It shows the relationship of the positions to each other. A staff position is like, what would happen is you'd see some dotted lines, and it would add some positions in there that are advisory in nature. Okay, so like the legal services. You want everybody to be able to go to legal services, but there's not a way to draw them in with a solid line where they can do that. So the dotted line represents that they can skip past their vice president to go talk to legal services if they need to, okay? And that's a line and staff structure. So really the only difference between a line structure and a line and staff is the addition of these staff positions. And so usually we see that when the organization starts getting a little larger. So small companies tend to have line structures. As they grow, they'll add some staff positions in. The next one's called a matrix structure. It's typically used for like a cross-functional team. The way that looks is like this. So you end up, if you're this employee right here, you have two bosses. You have the vice president of production who oversees you, and you have the project manager who's overseeing you. All right, this is a great structure within an already existing corporate structure. Okay, so you might have a line structure, and then you added in the project management aspect of it. This allows us to pool our best talent across the company. The only downfall is that sometimes there can be chain of command conflicts because project manager versus vice president, as it's written, I'd probably say that the vice president would trump the project manager, but sometimes these two positions are not really, one's not really above the other, and so you might find that these two managers are in conflict, and so that affects what this employee is able to do, and so that's the chain of command conflicts. Sometimes it can take longer to resolve problems. But as long as things are laid out up front and make it clear who you report to in what situations, then the matrix structure tends to work well. The network structure or a virtual organization is one where the business pretty much acts as an administrator, and they contract out all the other things. Okay. It adds a lot of flexibility, but it also loses some of that control over the quality of work. All right. The best example I have of this is like a general contractor working on a house. They manage all the other contractors. They do the administrative side of things, but they don't actually. They've just contracted with an electrician and a plumber and someone who does carpet and tile and all these other companies to complete the different parts of the work. Those aren't actually their employees, okay? And that's a good example of how a network or virtual organization works. And so that's it for the organizational structures lecture.